message today is called Escaping End Times Wrath. I think most of us understand that the end times are going to be a really difficult time. The first 3.5 years of those last 7 years are going to be difficult, and the last 3.5 of those 7 years are going to be horrible. Massive deaths, carnage, difficulties in all sorts of ways. So there's different groups who have different ideas on how to escape that end times wrath, and we will look at what the Bible says about escaping that end times wrath. So the two main thoughts anyway, on escaping the end times wrath result in two kinds of Christians, and they have different attitudes with respect to the whole question of escaping end times wrath. There are those who believe that they're going to be raptured away before things get bad, and thereby they're going to escape the wrath. They won't encounter the wrath. Instead, they'll be up in heaven, they believe, and not experience anything like that. And so they're called the Pretribulation group because they believe that the rapture happens before the tribulation period and that they are taken away from it and don't experience it. The other group of people are those who are ready to live through it in order to be alive to see Jesus return. So there's a strong desire in them to see Jesus return, strong enough that they would go through the end times and suffer through all that has to be suffered through in order that they can see Jesus return with their own eyes. And I admit that's has some appeal. But God says something very interesting through Isaiah to both of these groups, and that is this verse here, Isaiah 57, 1 through 2. And it says, "The righteous perish, and no one takes it to heart. The devout are taken away, and no one understands that the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. Those who walk uprightly enter into peace. They find rest as they lie in death." It's clear enough if you understand it. This translation that I'm using makes it quite clear what's being said there. The pre-tribulation group, they believe that the righteous are going to be raptured away, remember, and they're going to escape all the horrors of the tribulation and the great tribulation. And their belief is based mostly on this one verse. It's called the hidden rapture or the secret rapture. And that's because you really can't find it in the Bible. You have to take verses and twist them. And this is kind of the main verse that they use for that. And this one comes from 1 Thessalonians 5:9. And it says, "Because God has not appointed us to wrath, but to the possession of life in our Lord Yeshua the Messiah." So they believe that verse is saying Christians should never be experiencing any wrath, and that God will protect them from any kind of wrath that might come their way. That doesn't make sense in a bunch of ways, but that's not my topic today. And so they, along with that idea, they reject the idea that escaping wrath could mean anything other than being raptured away. There's no other way to escape wrath. But history shows that God's people have escaped wrath in lots of different ways, and being raptured away wasn't one of those. So nonetheless, that's what they believe, and the basis for that belief. But here Isaiah is saying death will be the escape from evil for the righteous. And that's important to understand because this group doesn't want to experience death. They think that they shouldn't have to experience any difficulties, and they should be able to escape from the evil no matter what it is. And Isaiah also says in that verse on the previous slide, no one understands this, and he's correct about that. No one seems to understand what Isaiah is saying there. He is saying, really, it's death is your way to escape from these evils that are coming. Now, the post-tribulation group, as I mentioned before, they're the ones who believe that the rapture comes after the end times, and that God's people, will go through the rapture period, some dying, of course, but some surviving until the end. But to them, Isaiah says, be careful what you ask for. The world is going to be a really horrible place at that time. And you should also look on death as being your escape from that. Your desire to live through to the very end of it shouldn't overwhelm anything else. And you should instead be expecting that there's a good chance that you will be killed. And so if the world decides to kill you, your attitude should be to smile and say thanks. Well, now, that's not exactly the words that were used by Isaiah, but that's the idea, is that you should view being killed during that tribulation period as a blessing, because it saves you from going through all of the rest of that tribulation period. And that also tells us something about how difficult that tribulation period is going to be. It's going to be so bad that dying is better than that. So And that's the next part we're going to get to here, is dying during the end time. And there are verses that talk about that too. Revelation says this, and it says, and they were victorious by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of his testimony, and they did not love their lives unto death. And that really repeats what we said before. Victory over the evil one does not come by outliving him. It comes by Jesus' sacrifice and by his word, and that is the only way that you have victory over the evil one. But even though it cost some of them their lives, and that's what it says, they did not love their lives unto death. So they did not try to protect their lives by sacrificing God and giving up on God or shortchanging God. They instead continued to do what God wanted them to do and live the way he wanted them to do. And it didn't matter to them that their lives were in jeopardy and that they might receive death for that. So, and then also here's Jesus speaking on that same topic. And he says, you shall not be afraid of those who kill the body and that are not able to kill the soul. Rather be afraid of him who can destroy soul and body in Gehenna. And so the same idea is being put forward there, is that you shouldn't be afraid of anyone in the world who is going to kill you, or in fact be afraid of death itself, because you have much more than that. You have someone who could, if he wanted to, destroy both soul and body, and you would have nothing left. And so the message there is that you shouldn't fear death. And death shouldn't be a concern for you. Death will come to everyone, of course, in due time. And if it comes for you earlier than you expected, that's fine. That's your escape during the end time. I want to make one last point here, and that is how we view our own lives as Christians on the earth right now. And that would, of course, apply to people in the end times. And it seems to me that most Christians in Western countries right now are too in love with their lives. We have great wealth. We have no real persecution in our lives. The worst thing that can ever happen to us is somebody might laugh at us or mock us. That's pretty light persecution, as persecution has gone historically. We've gotten used to the desirable and comfortable lives that we live, and we consider long lives to be our right, something that we deserve, something that is just guaranteed. We think of death as something to be avoided and not something that we should ever have to experience, except at the very end of a long, good life. But history doesn't bear that out. God's people, that hasn't been the natural way for God's people ever. And so because of this attitude that we deserve to have these long, wonderful, wealthy lives, we've come up with some bad theology, which we mentioned before. The pre-tribulation rapture is essentially an idea to avoid persecution, to avoid difficult times, and trying to find that in the scriptures and finding this verse which doesn't really say that. And people who chase after that idea are the people who are in love with their lives. And they shouldn't be in love with their lives that way. It should be no concern to them if they have to go through the tribulation and die in the tribulation. They should be happy to do that. So, and we see words just like that from Hebrews here. Instead, our attitude should be like this. These people died in faith, all of them, and they did not receive their promise, but they saw it from a distance and rejoiced in it and confessed that they were foreigners and nomads in the earth. Important words in a lot of ways. These people died still holding on to the faith, all of them. They didn't receive the promises that they had been given. Now, that Hebrews passage, the faith chapter, talks about a large number of different people throughout time, starting from the beginning until much later on. And all of these people did not receive that promise in their life, but they saw it from a distance and they rejoiced in it. And that should be our same attitude. If we go into the end times and suffer and die, we won't receive our promise right away, but we will receive our promise eventually. And the same thing was true of these people. And we should confess that we are foreigners and nomads in the earth. This is not our land, not our country, not anything to us. The things that are important to us should be the heavenly things and not the earthly things. So that Hebrews verse speaks to all of that. And there's another Hebrews verse coming later on in that same chapter, and it says, and persons of whom the world was not worthy, and they were as wanderers in desert places, and in mountains, and in caves, and in caverns of the earth. And so, again, this has been historically the viewpoint of Christians, is that the world treated them badly, and that isn't our current experience. In this country in particular, we live pretty good lives, easy lives without any struggles of any sort, really. And so this Hebrews verse is saying that the normal state is really we should be wanderers in desert places and in mountains and in caves and in caverns of the earth, and not just necessarily literally, but thinking of ourselves as being foreigners and nomads in the earth, as the earlier verse said. So our attitude towards life, I think, is wrong by many Christians. We view our lives as important, and we're too in love with them and too unprepared to give them up. And that causes us to distort theology sometimes and make a mess of what the Bible is saying.